all the good things that God does according to his character, and in the end, who gets the glory? God does. I mean, it's just crazy to think, well, I mean, I'm like top sheep of the year. Like, I'm following my shepherd so good. I mean, I grazed that grass so hard. I drank all that water from that fresh stream. And I'm like waddling around following that shepherd, like top sheep of the year. Give me all the glory because I'm just like the best sheep ever. No, all the glory goes to God. God is the one that's giving us those good things. God is the one who's leading us. God is the one that's doing that restoring work. And all of it, all that glory should go back to him. So I think that's really cool that David begins by just saying, here's what God's done for me. He is my shepherd, and all that glory goes straight back to him. It's not what I've done, it's what he's done. Now, so far we're kind of, when we think about visualizing this psalm, we're like, okay, this is great. I mean, green pastures, quiet waters, everything like that. But everything kind of takes a turn in verse 4. It says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. All of a sudden we get this bit of, this is not, a G-rated Disney movie anymore. We're going into PG, right? All of a sudden there's some conflict. All of a sudden there's this talk of the valley of the, in here it says darkest valley. In all older versions they'll say the valley of the shadow of death. Or if you're actually looking at Hebrew, a lot of people will look at it and say it's the valley of the death shadow. Is actually, it's a very odd phrasing in Hebrew. So, but when we look over it, we can imagine being in this valley. We can imagine we've left all the green grass, and the good water, and the nice grazing area, and we're waddling along following our shepherd as a good sheep, top sheep of the year. But we're waddling along following our good shepherd, and all of a sudden we notice on all sides, we're surrounded. On all sides, we're traveling through this valley that can be very dangerous. And on all sides, we just feel that looming presence of different dangers that can come out and get us. Because at the end of the day, sheep are pretty defenseless. And I don't know about you, but I've definitely hit points in my life where it's felt like I was stuck in the valley. I've hit points in my life where it felt like danger was just looming over, where I felt just beat down by things that happened. And there weren't even things where I went out and did something wrong. I didn't choose in college to break my leg. I didn't choose in college to get stuck rooming by myself for junior and senior year. I don't choose when I get sick. I don't choose the days I'm healthy. I don't choose when my car just didn't start like last year and I had to get a new car. We don't choose these types of things. Sometimes they're results of our own sin and foolishness, but a lot of times the saying goes, when it rains, it
pours.
What does that mean? A lot of times something bad can happen, and what happens next? Everything bad that could happen on top of it just starts to happen, and you go really quick from feeling like you're on the mountaintop of green grass and good water and great fields, and you feel like you just plunged headfirst into that valley. And you feel like just absolute despair is just looming over you, and you're just ready. You're ready to give up. But at that point, what's our response? We fear no evil because that shepherd, the Lord, is with me, the sheep. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So I think it's really cool that in this passage it talks about, that image of the shepherd leading the sheep, maybe in order to get us from one, green meadows and pure water and a great place to graze to the next place. What if that valley is in between? What if we need to go through that valley to get to the other side? And at the same time, when we are, not if, but when we hit points in our lives where we feel like we're in that deep valley, we don't need to be afraid of the evil there. It might be kind of lousy. There might be stuff that's less than ideal. I mean, just because we follow God doesn't mean we won't encounter anything painful or inconvenient or or challenging in our lives. In fact, a lot of times we can kind of feel tested. Kind of feel like our faith is being tested. But at the end of it all, we don't need to fear that evil because we know God's with us. And then the whole idea of the rod and your staff, they comfort me. When you think about the shepherd's staff, that can be used for a variety of different things. They can be comforting because, the bear jumps out, and the bear gets booped on the nose, or beat up or whatever. I'm just kind of like saying, it literally is in the Bible that, David was fighting off wild animals to keep his flock safe, right? So then you think of the shepherd as, okay, the shepherd can go beat up anything that jumps out of the bushes, but at the same time, the shepherd can guide the sheep. Now, the shepherd isn't trying to beat the sheep up with the rod and staff, but is guiding the sheep with it. And I think that a lot of times, God, in those moments where we're the most vulnerable, we can be recipients of that loving correction. We can feel, oh, I kind of got myself into the situation. I can feel some guilt here and ask for forgiveness. I can be aware that God is trying to fill me with that joy that I feel completely depleted with, and He's just trying to snap me out of it and give me enough strength to get through. God could be trying to direct us back onto that path when we're in that deepest, darkest valley. Right? Now, we get out of the valley, we're on the other side. Now, one thing in verse 5 and 6, some people think that this psalm really does shift from the image of the shepherd to 5 and 6. Now it's almost the Lord is a gracious host, right? Now, there's a whole argument, you guys can read all about it, and it's like master's and PhD level arguments about how the psalm really got put together by David and why 5 and 6 is so different than 1 to 4. But it really does continue that theme of that song of trust. Now, in 5 and 6, it shows that God is a gracious and good host for us. Kind of continuing, maybe not exactly the same image of shepherd, but the image of a host greeting us, welcoming us, providing for us, doing those same things just as a shepherd would do. Because in verse 5 it says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows." So now when we think in our minds about how God is a gracious and good host who provides for us, just like someone would welcome a weary traveler. Back in ancient Near Eastern cultures, there were a lot of rules of hospitality. That God would, there's a couple of things that they're out of the normal. Number one, I think God would prepare us a table in the presence of our enemies. I can't imagine that, at first, just thinking about that. It's almost like, if you watched one of the Marvel movies, like Endgame or something, like, as soon as they get the first good punch on Thanos, they go, okay guys, we can beat him up. Everybody let's take 5 and just have a picnic right here in the middle of the battle. We're surrounded by enemies, but we know we're stronger, right? So we can just go ahead and have a picnic. That's not kind of how it is, but when we look at this, it just doesn't seem to quite fit. Why would God prepare us a table in the presence of our enemies? Well, even though our enemies are there, we know that God is so much greater, so much bigger. And we know that even in times where we're freaked out about what's going on around us, God's calling us just to be present with Him and enjoy time with Him. I can't really think of any more, I guess more of a timely response to what's going on than verse 5. What's going on in the world now. With a lot of fear around the coronavirus, and a lot of fear around safety, and a lot of fear around what's going to happen next. Am I surrounded by people who are healthy or sick, or actually for a lot of you guys, when you go to school, maybe you're looked at and made fun of because you're American-born Chinese. Maybe you coughed in class or sneezed in class or sniffled a bit, and then the jokes start coming, right? I know I only work at CBC. I am white, and I work at CBC, and people who know I work with Chinese American youth then sent me memes and ask me if I was going to work this week, and do we still have church, all sort of stuff. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, you know, they'll send me things about the coronavirus. And first off, you know, that type of xenophobic response is flat out wrong. But second off, a lot of times people are consumed by that fear in the world. So maybe when you're preparing that, when that table is being prepared for you at that lunch table and you're surrounded by people who are staring or looking or making comments, can we find time to just have that peace and joy of the Lord, even when we feel like we're surrounded by people that would tear us down, make fun of us, treat us wrong? That God still provides for our needs. And along with that it says, you anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. So it's customary for, we have, oh yes, we do have communion today.
It's next week.
That's next week.
It's the first Tuesday.
No, not
first.
today, yeah, not today.
Yeah.
Wait, do we have communion today?
No.
No.
It's not Tuesday.
We don't have
No, that's
communion
next
today.
week.
Yeah.
This is the
This
first
is
This is the second.
No, this is February 2nd, but the
second.
first weekend.
Oh. Yeah, I asked them, do we have a Holy Communion? Yes. That's from Daisy's mom.
Ask if it's right now because
Okay.
this is the first week.
Let me double
You wanna
check.
go check? Yeah. So I'll continue because we only have one verse to go, and we'll get confirmed. Yeah. But a lot of times, let's bring it back in, and if we have communion, I'll make sure we get down there, and I will take all the blame for making you late. Okay. So verse 5 talks about not only preparing the table, but it says you anoint my head with oil, right? So it talks about how a lot of times in terms of hospitality back in that culture, in the Bible, you take a small amount of oil, anoint somebody's head to greet them into their home. But here it talks about my cup overflows. That God fills us and provides for us to the point of overflow. We talked about that a couple years ago for summer retreat,